Alright, for the second group critique, we're going to start with Mireya's work, and she's doing chocolate chip muffins when we're looking at her denotative approach. So it's interesting, again, how we're using scale, as we have discussed in the lecture part of this assignment. So we're looking at scale, and we're looking at contrast in how we read. So this is nice to see how large we're using the text over here. And we're seeing the word vegan positioned in an interesting way. And then we're looking at how these divisions in between the words of the title are creating those, the body copy being the ingredients and what also looks like the directions. Now, I think this is pretty good for a first step. I think you have some interesting different movements going on. What I'm noticing though is we're not very particular about how we're using the smaller areas of text. So I like what you're doing with directions, and we see a lot more sense of hierarchy here with directions and the paragraph. I would make this a lot smaller. I know you're trying to fill in the space, but it still kind of competes with this area right here and this area right here. So create the oven to 3 the Fahrenheit I would definitely make a lot smaller. And I like how you're using the bold scale over here. I would start to include that in areas like ingredients and other areas of your text where you have those subtitles, just so we have some consistency overall. Or you might want to have ingredients on its own on the sentence, and then you start with your ingredients list. You also want to make sure you're not doing things like this where you're separating the amount of reading from what your reader's supposed to be reading. So here you have a certain level and scale being used, so you might want to use the same thing over here for the rest of the text. So you want to maintain that sense of consistency for what is your body copy, what is your title, and what is your subtitle, and what is your pull quote. So right here we see allow to cool for 10 minutes before moving from the muffin tray. I'm not sure if this is part of this text or if this is the pull quote. If this is the pull quote, then great. But the only problem is this competes with this. Stir until combined, do not overmix. So this seems to be more in line with what you would read here in this paragraph, so we might want to make sure that we establish this as a separate level of read from this right here. So this is the sentence that we would read with this paragraph. Same goes for this as well here, the 350 Fahrenheit. So just some little technical details, okay? But I think this is a good first round for you. For your connotative, I think your approach is nice. It's fairly clean, simple, and straightforward. So now it's about little details here. So you might want to have a little bit more space between each and every one of those lines right here because it's a little bit tight. So you want to open this up a little bit more, okay? Create some breathing room for your reader. And I like what you're doing here with stacking of the text, so vegan chocolate. And I think the title is chocolate chip muffins, or is it vegan chocolate chip muffins? So be a little bit more considerate of how you want your reader to be reading that. So if it's vegan chocolate chip muffins, vegan chocolate and then muffins, and not seeing chocolate chip anywhere, so the chip is missing. So just be a little bit more deliberate with how your subtitles are being treated. So if vegan is supposed to be bigger, we might need to see that a little bit bigger. So vegan and then chocolate and then muffins in general. So muffins seems to have a certain level of read, which is what we read first, which is nice, but we might want to make this a little bit bigger, and so is chocolate. And so these two just need a little bit more attention to our reader, but not by much, because you're already stacking the text, which gives it a little bit more differentiation from the rest of your text over here. I like how we're starting to rotate the text here. One thing we want to make sure is how we're reading this. So are we reading this here first? And then are we, so we just want to make sure we organize this a little bit better on the page. So if this is step 1, step 2, step 3, we might want to see the upside down text not upside down. So maybe flip this more like this right here so we can read this part. I know you're trying to follow a certain path for your text, but keep in mind that you want to make sure your reader is able to read this, all right? Just be a little bit more deliberate with how you're placing things on the page. And also, it looks like with these circles over here, they're kind of continuation of your directions. So, looks like 5 is here, and then I'm not sure where 6 is. I think 6 is right here, 7 and 8, 9 and 10. So just a little bit more deliberate moves. If number 8 is here, so number 7 is here, so maybe you might want to bold some of those numbers so that we know that this is going to be number 8 or number 9. Or you might even take out the number and put it right here or somewhere here, just so we can kind of see, a little bit better as to where we're moving along the page. But I think this is a very nicely designed layout for your muffin recipe. And I think this works well with your denotative as well. So we just need a little bit more touches here and there of deliberate moves, just so we have more intention and also just more ease of readability. But good job on this first round. I believe we're looking at Saul's work, and Saul did torta ahogada. I like that we are able to see the two side by side and compare. What I would definitely suggest is just scaling things a little bit back and just toning things down a little bit more. I think what you're doing with the text here is good, as long as we're not as long as we're still able to read things, that we're fine. But we don't want to do this to almost every single thing on the page. I think we did it well here. Now let's try to scale things back to where we read things normally and bring a sense of grid and structure to the page. So I don't mind maybe doing the pull quote like this, but this is an area where it starts to become very hard to read because it's white text on black and it's starting to be a much smaller scale. So let's try to bring this back into like its normal state of readability. Same goes for areas right here where it starts to kind of vibrate against the black type. So, just scale back and just kind of tone down the effects a little bit. Maybe just stick to the title and subtitle, and maybe the name here, Guadalajara, is fine. But the rest, definitely let's tone down. I think for your denotative, you have a good approach with how you're treating your title. One thing I would recommend is getting rid of those boxes here, which you don't need. If this is step 1, we already have the 1 coordinated with this text over here. Step 2, we can achieve this sense of readability here by removing this and making sure that this would be the next step that we read. So we already know in the English language we're going from right to left, top to bottom, so we don't really need some of those guides for us to contain our information. Okay, so let's get rid of those. Let's avoid illustrating on the page, and let's create a sense of grid used for the page. So this is something you can achieve with this title that you've already established nicely. So see if this can reinforce other elements on the page. So if we have ahogada line with Guadalajara, and then the rest of your body copy here, what looks like a pull quote can line up with the A, and then Guadalajara can line up with the A, and then tortas ahogadas can also line up like so. And so you have this invisible line right here, and this can continue down and reinforce other areas of your copy over here, and it would make a much easier read for your reader. And then see how you can lay out ingredients in a different way where it's not just centered. So it's always nicer when we see things that are off-center, because already you're establishing for your reader a asymmetrical layout on the page where things are not centered. You have your text here over on the right hand side, and then you're using Mexican dish also on a flush right. And you know, it's just a lot more interesting when we're seeing things that are not centered on the page. So let's remove the centered axis here and start putting things maybe flush left, just to balance things out. But I think overall this is a good first set for you, and just need some small tweaks here and there for your next round. I'm not sure whose I'm looking at here, but this looks like an older version. I will double check. Let's go to Alejandra's work. Alejandra did pumpkin spice latte, and I believe this is her denotative. So this is a good first round, Alejandra. I believe you pretty much did what the assignment asked for, which was using the different levels of hierarchy, and it's definitely simple and easy to read. One thing I would suggest for your second round is just a few tweaks here and there. What I would suggest is maybe we take a look at how we're using this space right here along the sides, and maybe how we're using the boldness of this word, and maybe combine that with step 1 and step 2. Maybe not orient our text like that, just because we want some consistency on the page. I like where we're putting the level and time and how much this yields. This can probably go down here. We don't need all that space for that specific amount of information, because when we use that much space, as we can see, it kind of gives like more attention to something that you don't necessarily need that much attention to. So maybe move it up a little bit more to your title. Okay, so those are some tips for you. I'd also remove the widow right here, so find a way either to make this a little bit smaller to push seconds to the same line, so we avoid some of that, avoid some of those areas happening. You're fine on the ingredients list. I would just say careful with how close this is becoming to your text over here. Yeah, but just make sure that we have a little bit more space between these areas and these areas. But I like that you're lining things up nicely on the page, so I like that overall sense of structure that you've achieved. Now let's go to your connotative. So you seem to be repeating your title a few times, which is fine. I don't mind that. But what I would like to see is us removing those lines right here. So remember, we're doing all this with text. So how do we achieve this autumn, fall-like color palette that you're trying to work with the text? So let's try to do that with the text instead of putting it in boxes like so, because this is starting to look like an information graphic or an infographic. So that's not what we want to focus on. So see if we can start to pull the text out and play around with it, kind of what we did like here with the title, where you're actually playing with scale and color. How would this look like for the ingredients list? What would it look like for pure pumpkin puree when you're starting to look at scale and different color associations like so? Don't be afraid of color. If this is something you want to use, I'm perfectly fine with that. But let's take a look at how we can remove the text out of those color boxes and play with the text itself. Remember, this is not an illustration, this is a typographic approach. I think you're close. You've done it here nicely. Let's see if we can work with the rest of your recipe in the same manner and fashion, using color and scale, without those guides and those squares. Okay? But I think overall, good job. This is a good first round for you. Let's go to Michael's work. So Michael did honey barbecue wings. So Michael, I think it's good that you've chosen a specific font for your recipe. I definitely read barbecue when I see a font like that. And it seems like you also work with the same font for your connotative, which is perfectly fine. And it looks like you also use Rockwell for the rest of your recipe. I'm guessing that's what your font treatment is. So this is good in terms of taking a look at how we're structuring the layout. I don't necessarily like that we're doing things on the center right here. I like how we're structuring things flush left. So let's see if we can establish that on this side over here. And I think we have some things that are missing, like a pull quote. So we have the copy here, which is the title, and then the ingredients and instructions. Maybe we can put a pull quote somewhere by making this a little bit smaller, this area a little bit smaller, and bringing in another layer of information. Okay? And overall, let's see if we can bring in a little bit more white space, because right now things are coming a little bit close to the edge. So let's shave off some of that text or make it smaller, but let's not bring things a little too close to the edge. Because remember, if we want to print this out, and we're holding this with our thumbs, we don't want our thumb or any areas of our fingers to be obstructing the information. So we just want to make sure we have a nice border of white space around. All right. For your connotative, I think this is an interesting way of stacking your titles and seeing how this translates into areas like your instructions. This is nice to look at. See if there's other ways we can actually bring this in for the ingredients list. If you're starting to do something like this here and here, well, why not do it on this other side right here? It seems like half of your assignment here was connotative and then this went to denotative. But see if you can start to bring some of this movement into your recipe right here. And let's look at some of those areas of white space that you have over here, and let's see if we can kind of fill it in somehow with more text or so. Remember, you're the editors of this recipe, so you can edit as much as you want or bring in as much text as you want. The word enjoy seems a little bit, because I see the word enjoy here in this font, but I don't see it anywhere else here on the page, that I'm inclined to maybe use either one of these two fonts right here. So let's bring in a little bit more consistency to your layout. But let's definitely see if this movement is something that you're working on, can be translated to your ingredients list or maybe even the word barbecue. I think this is a very good example of what you're doing with your connotative that could be interesting. But I like also the white space that you're establishing here for your viewer. Okay, so this looks like the fourth person here in this group. So this is the end of group 4, and I will be moving on to group 3. And I'll see you in the next video.